Just a quick introduction. If you're a Westerner who is considering living and working in Thailand who has a university degree, then pay attention to this part here. Now I know I may not look it, but I've got 10 years of experience of living, working, and most importantly, hiring corporate staff in Thailand. And easily one of the biggest mistakes I see foreigners making when they're coming over here looking for corporate work is the format of their resume. So if you want someone who actually works over here in a corporate job and hires corporate staff to go through your resume and tell you what you need to format it as, then send it to my email address at loganinthailandtv@gmail.com. I can tell you right now that you might be the most qualified person on the planet for the job, but if your resume is in an ugly or disgusting format to read, it's likely getting tossed out rather than considered. So if you are considering moving here and want a professional eye over your resume for Thai format style, then send it to the address and I'll try and get back to you as soon as possible about what you need to do in order to make it ready for this country. Thanks for that. Let's go to the actual video.
There are currently an estimated 10 million men under 40 in the US right now who will provide no benefit to the state beyond paying taxes because they will never get married, they will never have kids. In reality, the only meaning society can provide for their existence will be to contribute part of their salary to the government for the enrichment of other people's children. And that's only if they actually have a job. Because roughly 30% of all men born who make it to 40 will never find a partner and have children. And with the rapidly declining birth and marriage rates we're now seeing in the current day, research groups are projecting that this number will increase to 50% as early as 2050. You know when you watch those docos where you see a huge number of male animals fighting to mate with one female and you think, wow, nature can be so cruel. Well, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. At the same point, at least with humans, it's not like the 30% of males who fail at the mating game are doomed from birth. Things like money, fame, charm, and even religion can create situations where men who would have failed to find a partner can now be successful in having a family today. But this just emphasizes how different humans are to animals as our standards, lifestyles, and beliefs keep updating at a rapid pace. And just like getting our sneakers manufactured by Bangladeshis or having Guatemalans produce our fruit, Western men are also beginning to realize that they don't have to let their environment condemn them to becoming part of the childless 30%. Instead, they can use their comparatively higher levels of wealth to take advantage of increased domestic competition in the mating and dating situation by going global. Thus enter the Passport Bro. Despite an estimated 30% of men historically never getting married and having kids, the expectation that nearly all men will follow this path has been reinforced to us from birth for centuries via traditions, stories, religion, media, and of course, our own biases. We're raised in families and spend our time growing up and hanging around children from other families. Now, the only kids in history hanging out with single, childless adult men you can probably recall were Marty McFly, Macaulay Culkin, and the Catholic Boys Choir group. So we already have this attitude in society that separates us from the large numbers of single, adult, childless men out there, which means when we try to grasp this number of 30% in our minds, we tend to think it's bullshit. Yeah, maybe a random uncle or neighbor, but definitely not 3 out of the 10 male adults that we interact with. Now, if you're like me, you might have presumed that this high number might be because a lot of men previously died due to war and conflict, and it's only under our current, mostly stable circumstances we would recognize these huge numbers of single men in society. But the 20th century contained the most conflict in human history, and it was only responsible for around 2% of deaths of all men over the course of that 100 years. Add in other factors like disease, disabilities, men who die young, men being openly gay, or simply being batshit insane, and we're only pushing it to around 5% of men. That still leaves 25% of straight, able-bodied, mentally stable men who never get married and have kids throughout history. It's only now, with every person on Earth having access to their own form of mass communication, that discussions are starting to take place about what men are facing when they discover they have no sense of purpose in a traditional society. And it's not like society is offering up a lot of valid alternatives to marriage and kids like men used to have. There's no wars to fight, there's no new lands to discover, no treasure to bury. Nowadays, most perpetually single men will have nothing to do but keep themselves amused and entertained until they die. Thus why gamers and comic book fans keep getting older and older and older. Yet weirdly enough, the conversation that takes place about these men nearly always portrays them in a negative light, as if they're the specific cause of their outcome. We get articles, we get journals, we get news stories and commentary in our current age labeling the 25% of men as incels or neckbeards or nice guys and man children regularly, which are pretty easy insults in a world constantly redefining male and female dynamics at a rate incomparable to any time in human history. We'd always thought that sex sold, but social media has revealed it's anger and rage that are the most addictive emotions for humans. And even though a passport bro is nothing more than a label thrown on something that's been happening for centuries now, I mean, does anyone think the world got mapped by a bunch of nuclear families sailing the oceans? It was still inevitable that once the term started trending on social media, it was going to inspire a pseudo-philosophical nosedive into everything patriarchal, sexist, and bigoted about it, and led mainly by middle and upper middle class Western women. And whether they've been labeling the entire concept of a passport bro as toxic, mocking these men for not trying to date them, or just making up baseless accusations that the movement is based around sex trafficking or PDF files, any guy who has taken the passport bro route has probably heard everything said about them under the sun by now. And the hypocrisy behind the arguments Western women are making against passport bros is simply baffling. For example, supporting the slave labor of women in third world countries with a pair of cheap heels on Temu? That's okay. But dating a woman from a country where those shoes are made?
Oh, you better believe that's a pattern.
Besides the racism, bigotry, and hypocritical white savior complex that gets projected into these conversations, the general consensus is that unless a Western man is trying to court the vastly superior Western woman model, then they must be a complete failure at life. This projection of unless he wants us, he's obviously a loser is based in such holier-than-thou privilege and racism, it's incredible it even gained a platform to begin with. Firstly, Western women have celebrated the concept of exploiting wealth gaps for relationship benefits for centuries, and gold digger isn't exactly a word that just fell out of the fucking sky one day. And secondly, it becomes even more difficult to take modern feminism seriously at all when Western women are demanding complete control over their own decisions, but unironically demanding agency over the decisions adult women in other countries get to make. I'm really sure that the hundreds of university-educated women I work with in Thailand would really appreciate it if I told them that a whiny blogger in New York didn't want them dating a foreigner because she knows what's best for them. Yeah, when it comes down to it, these women are actually right, though passport bros are taking advantage of a situation for their benefit. In fact, it's so blatantly obvious that denying it just makes you an ignorant asshole. Passport bros are using their privileged positions in life that gave them access to higher levels of wealth to gain something they wouldn't have had access to under normal conditions. But as Mr. Hetfield put it so eloquently,
So fucking what?
because when exactly did we start policing advantages in society? Well, apart from the French and Russian Revolution. Besides the honest socialist university student answer of privilege ends when it comes to what I own, it's stark raving mad to think that we can start using fairness as an equitable measure to judge people's actions in life. Where you're born, when you're born, who you're born to, what you look like, what your genetics are, what society you're raised in, what education you're given, what opportunities you're provided, what your family is like. Absolutely nothing is fair in life. Not one human being in history chose the position that they were born into, and sitting around creating arbitrary and imaginary rules about equity simply proves how privileged someone has to be in order to have time to ponder this philosophical bullshit when the majority of humans in the world don't. Is it fair that Western men can use their higher levels of wealth to attract women in developing countries? Of course not. It's also not fair that Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, Lionel Messi, Roger Federer, and Michael Phelps were born with more athletic talent in their left pinky's fingernail than I have in my entire body. If you want to talk about every example of unfairness in society, this video would literally never end. The reality is that anyone using a position of privilege to specifically benefit themselves in any way over anyone or anything else could be classed as unethical. And that's every human being on Earth. How simply being born human is a privilege over every other living organism that has existed. So should we start providing equity to the fucking blobfish? And as 30,000 years of human history hasn't yet provided us with a blueprint blueprint for what we're supposed to be doing with all this living and breathing stuff, the only absolute nature has taught us is that every organic life form has an innate drive to multiply and protect its progeny. Well, except pandas, but fuck pandas. Means the fairness argument against Passport Bros may have substance relative to humans with enough privilege to debate it, but it's pithy at best and ludicrously selfish at worst depending on who it's coming from. If you've been gifted a privileged position to be able to avoid being part of the 30% of men who will be the last of their bloodline, then is it unethical to use that advantage to avoid it? Does it really matter if a Western man has kids with a girl next door or a girl 2,000 miles away? Does anyone have the right to dictate who someone should start a family with? The argument begins to sound more like eugenics than privilege the further it goes on. At the same point, I hope no men in this situation are sitting there saying, "Here, here," either, because some of the male movements that have become popular in the West over the last decade are fucking disgraceful. As far as I'm concerned, the MGTOW concept is the equivalent of pissing in the face of your ancestors. For thousands of years, our families did anything they could to survive every natural disaster, illness, conflict, war, genocide, famine, plague, and financial disaster to bring us into existence. And are now modern men actively repaying them by saying, women in my area are picky, so I'm going to end my bloodline in order to play Call of Duty and jerk off to Pornhub whenever I feel like it. And instead of the Passport Bro movement being about giving the 30% of men in the West who are now wealthy enough to kick nature in the dick a new lease on life, recent popularization has become more about acting selfish, misogynistic, and partaking in hedonistic experiences. The glamorization of body counts, picking up women, and living to excess the Passport Bro movement has become isn't helping any men defeat the reality of life 30% of men will face. It's become clickbait bullshit aimed to appeal to people's pleasure receptors. Yeah, life will become easier following that path, but whoever said life was supposed to be fucking easy? Being a good husband and father is incredibly difficult. Hell, I fail at it every single day, but it is also objectively the only thing our natural instincts remind us constantly that we should be doing. So if you're going to be a Passport Bro, try to remember the real reason the movement came to be. It wasn't to spend your days degrading women in your country for having an OnlyFans while you're spending your time getting shit-faced and fucking cheap whores. It was to explore, improve, and grow beyond your environment in an incredibly huge and diverse world. If you're lucky enough to be born to not have to spend your life living in the same house, on the same street, in the same town, and in the same city, take advantage of it and get out there. Or yeah, use your goddamn privilege. Just don't waste it on hedonistic short-term pleasure chases. I'm Logan in Thailand. I try to prepare people for moving to Thailand for professional office work, along with sharing my own insights I've picked up after a decade of living, working, and raising a family here. If you want to hear more videos like this, I'd appreciate a sub, and feel free to let me know of any topics or subjects that you'd like to me discuss in future videos. My battery's about to die. I gotta cut this so quick. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it.